Good morning, and thank you very much for this nice invitation in this nice city, in this nice room here. The central claim of my talk is that digitization and composers' interdisciplinary practice do more than expand composers' creative options. They also open up new ways of art music to operate within other art forms, such as visual arts, spoken theater, and opera, genres that were far less accessible to composers in the analog era. In short, the compositional space is widening. First, I'll briefly sketch the theoretical framework for my hypothesis, and then I'll walk you through 3 examples that makes this development concrete. In my 2012 book, The Digital Revolution of Music, I argued that the digital revolution would deinstitutionalize the new music system. The core idea is simple. The barriers to entry would drop, both for becoming a composer and for getting works performed. In a digital music culture, you don't necessarily need extensive formal training, or you don't need a publisher, or you don't need a commission for a large ensemble to realize your own composition. The reason it became possible to write a philosophy of music in 2012 is that a new medium of composition was emerging, the medium of samples. The shift from musical notation to sample-based composition is as significant as the shift from an oral to illiterate music culture in the 11th century. This shift in compositional practice also changed the very meaning of new music. Before digital culture, new music could still align itself with the classical tradition and with the ideal and the idea of absolute music. In that context, new music was largely instrumental and pursued novelty through material progress, that is, the invention of new isms like 12-tone music, spectralism, musique concrète, instrumental, minimalism, and musical postmodernism. Since at least the 1980s, no generally new ism has emerged, so new music hit an innovation crisis and began to look old. My argument was this: with material progress largely exhausted and sample-based composition opening up new possibilities, a new idea of art music would emerge, what I called relational music. In a digital music culture, the computer becomes an interface for composing not only with note and tones, but also with images, video, text, and language. Instead, it builds this kind of music doesn't exclude so-called extra musical material. Instead, it builds multiple relations to it, and that's why I coined the term relational music. Relational music initially addresses an innovation bottleneck that had built up in new music. But if we look at the visual arts, multimedia art turns out to have only a transitional phase. In recent years, a far more radical paradigm shift has taken place in the arts. Novelty is no longer produced by inventing new aesthetic material, but by generating new aesthetic content, new structures of meaning that matter in social discourses. In that sense, relational music has 2 modes. It can unfold as multimedia music, or it can unfold as content aesthetic music. When I published The Digital Revolution of Music in 2012, there was no sign of such content aesthetic work. So at that point, the book remained a speculation about the future. What did exist were strong examples of relational music, but they remained multimedia compositions with almost no reference to the live world. However, that changed in the years that followed, And in 2023, a little over 10 years later, I was able to publish the volume Music and Reality. There are now notable examples of content aesthetic music. Music and Reality also fills theoretical gaps that the digital revolution of music left open. In particular, it lays out a fully developed theory of conceptual music. It also sets out a theory of musical postmodernism, one that explains why postmodernism could only take hold half-heartedly in the 20th century new music. Finally, I show that this new form of art music is best described as reflexive music. To give you a clearer sense of Music and Reality, I have translated the table of contents into English, as you can see here. The core theory chapters, the chapters about relational music, concept music, musical postmodernism, and reflexive art music, are highlighted in blue, and chapters that discuss examples of content aesthetic music are marked in red here. That brings me to my second part of my talk, where I will present 3 striking works created between 2018 and 2020. Let me start with the open opera performance Sun and Sea, Marina, staged in the Lithuanian Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2019. The piece was composed by Lina Lapolyte, who trained as a classical violinist at the Academy of Music and Theatre in Vilnius. The performers lay on an artificial beach in swimsuits and bikinis. Children played nearby, a dog barked now and then, and the audience watched from a first-floor balcony, looking down on the whole setup. What you heard was a blend of pop music and minimalism. For listeners who care about art music, as you, that sound became, at least for me, hard to endure over time. But that was the point. Over 8 hours, this wellness music created a relaxed beach atmosphere, while underneath an ecological dystopia slowly shimmered into view. Despite its musical limitations, the work won the biennale's top prize, the Golden Lion. In context, that was plausible. The piece stood out within the exhibition as a whole. It was also a perfect fit for the Biennale because of its location. The piece was staged in a remote building, and visitors reached it like tourists, strolling through Venice's narrow, winding streets. In the following years, Sun and Sea has toured widely. Next, you'll see a few photos from different venues. Most art scenes are pop-friendly. But looking ahead, I expect new music composers to write more demanding music for installations and for performances like this. In any case, relational art music can connect with a much larger audience than 20th century new music ever did. That opening will come with trade-offs. Musical complexity and fine-grained differentiation may decline simply because once you add text, image, and action, other layers of complexity enter the work. And this shift is hard to avoid once material progress has exhausted itself. New music composed in notation, performed on acoustic, classical instruments and staged in a concert hall has in a sense become a classical form itself. In the 20th century, the exploration of listening and the discovery of new sounds took place inside a specialized subsystem of new music. Today, those musical techniques can be transferred into other arts and through relational and content aesthetic projects reach a broader public. My next example comes from spoken theater, a 2020 production of Sarah Kane's 448 Psychosis in Berlin by the theater director Ulrich Rasche. The text depicts a stay in a psychiatric clinic, moving through delusions, depression, self-contempt, outbursts of rage, and suicide attempts. The trademark of Ulrich Rasche is having actors move on treadmills throughout the entire performance, as you can see here. Each spoken word is timed to the steps, giving the text a strong pulse and enabling the actors and choirs to develop striking expressiveness through movement. Over several hours, however, the technique has become or can become monotonous, which makes an additional musical layer desirable. In this production, a small ensemble of 4 musicians played bass, keyboards, and drums. What's striking is that they are playing from sheet music, which is unusual, almost impossible for theater music. Unlike an opera, a composer can't simply arrive at a theater rehearsal with a finished score and expect the staging to follow it. In theater, the entire production takes shape in rehearsal. In addition, most theater directors can't read music anyway, and they wouldn't accept being constrained by musical instructions in the rehearsal process. That's why theater music is typically either played from tape or improvised, as it was the case in Rasche's early production. Musically, I found those early pieces unconvincing. Over a long evening, improvised music tends to recycle the same patterns again and again, and it rarely became complex, nuanced, or differentiated. In 448 Psychosis, the music suddenly sounded completely different. It felt as if each scene had its own music, specially composed for it. To give you a sense of this, I've added together 7 short clips from that 3-hour production. Sarah Kane's play in this staging was aesthetically overwhelming, and it sounded nothing like what you normally hear in theater. So I wanted to know how that was possible. I emailed the young and unknown composer Nico van Wersch, and his answer revealed the key. He had built a modular library of instrumental samples in advance, and with that setup, he could write music in real time during rehearsals, what he called, somewhat ironically, pressure composing, meaning composing under the pressure of a real rehearsal with an ambitious theater director and capricious actors. That changed the workflow. Instead of delivering a finished score, Van Wersch could offer the director musical options on the spot and respond immediately to new staging ideas. As a result, the music stayed open and flexible until the end of the rehearsal process. Only 2 weeks before the premiere, were the sample-based pieces transcribed into conventional staff notation, and the 4 musicians joined the rehearsal process. My third example is Trond Reinhold's Norwegian opera. In this case, new music does not open up new possibilities in the visual arts or to spoken theater, but in the genre of opera. Strictly speaking, the genre of opera is being reinvented here, which is why Reinholdsen calls it opera without the letter E. It is such an aesthetically and intellectually radical form of music theater that it would have no chance of being performed in a conventional opera house. Central to Norwegian opera is its ongoing film production, such as the Ö-series, which now include 17 episodes. In broad terms, the series stage a sweeping world myth, from the creation of the world through the invention of fire, to the invention of language, religion, art, and philosophy, to the human mind that becomes self-aware. These film scenes are then reused across different projects, whether as concerts, cinema screenings, or musical theater productions. For example, the piano concerto Theory of the Subject was premiered at Oslo's Ultima Festival in 2016, draws on episode 12. Episode 13, 14, and 15 in turn appear in the so-called Ö-trilogy, presented at the Munich Biennale in 2018. The music for these films was produced entirely with samples, using a virtual orchestra. And Reinholdsen didn't just compose it, he also sang the parts for all the characters himself. Accordingly, the characters in the Ö-series are not singers, but actors performing singing and performing acting with exaggerated gestures. In the films, however, all vocal material comes from a single source, the composer himself. And of course, the musical instruments aren't real instruments either. I've put together another potpourri to give you an aesthetic and musical impression of the Norwegian opera.
Sitting
It's also crucial that the Norwegian opera does not pursue one stable musical aesthetic, as you could hear. Instead, it is organized around radical stylistic pluralism. You can hear pop songs, spoken word, bombastic film music, a microtonally tuned organ, an a cappella choir, a Bach cantata, serialism, jazz rock, techno, electronic sounds, and more. The stylistic pluralism of the Ö trilogy is not postmodern pluralism because it lacks a crucial feature. Reinholdsen doesn't quote styles in order to ironize them. Instead, he looks for the musical expression that fits each text and each theatrical scene. So, like Sun and Sea and 448 Psychosis, this is another example of content aesthetics. What's philosophically striking about the Ö trilogy is that its primitivist art brut aesthetic makes an aesthetic overcoming of postmodernism possible. When these artificial figures with their foam heads sing Hegel's notorious line, "The truth is a whole," their childlike naivety makes you start to believe it. And this is nothing less than a postmodernist statement. The Digital Revolution of Music and Reality are two complementary books. Read together, they show how a new concept of art music emerged over roughly 12 years, from 2008 to 2020. As in the visual arts, we can now speak of a content aesthetic turn, a turn that shifts art music's center of gravity away from the concert form toward opera. Thank you very much.